Hello, everyone. This is Tijen Genco, Master Certified Coach and Board Certified Health and Wellness Coach. You are tuned into Coaching with Mastery and Elegance with Tijen Genco. And today I have such a pleasure hosting Meryl Moritz. Welcome, Meryl.
Thank you so much, Jen.
Meryl and I met years ago when I was serving at the board of the Philadelphia chapter for ICF and the continuing education role. And now we are collaborating again, similar thing for a different context. So, Meryl, such a pleasure to have you here. How would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
So that's always an interesting question in any context. How would I like to introduce myself? Would I like to introduce myself the way my mother would introduce me, like this is my first child and a troublemaker? Or would I like to introduce you to my professional vitae? So I have probably a combination of things. So I'm a lifetime student.
Mm.
I am COVID contributed to that majorly because everything that I had worked for so many years kind of got upended with the pandemic. But it activated again my learner mindset and had me take my skills and use them in collaboration with 300 other people who also were up against it and seeing if we could do good with what we had and maybe first see if we could create some initiatives to stop the spread of COVID and then look at the future of education since COVID was interfering with that as well, looking at the future of humanity, looking at the future of the planet.
Mm.
Open my eyes. What I do for a day job before COVID and resumed is doing leadership coaching at the intersection of massive change and leadership and team development. So I like that. I consider that I have the best job in the world. I've been coaching for 30 years and I have a global practice. I have worked as a partner in a partnership for a period of time, as a solo coach, as a coach with a team reporting into me as part of my company, Meryl Moritz Resources. I'm a coach educator, I'm a coaching supervisor, and I'm a mentor coach. So, why I'm doing all that has a lot to do with the vision that I realized many years ago. I envisioned a world where anyone who wanted access to a coach had it, regardless of economic situation, where they lived, etc. And to that end, I wanted to contribute to the excellence of coaching the professions, hence educating and mentoring. And then coach supervising is to, feeling a duty of care to the public as well. Are we doing for the public what the public deserves and hopes for? So that contribution to the profession in that regard. What else would I like to say? So I can tell you how I got here, but let's see what the next question is, and I'll be ready for that.
Well, that's already beautiful and lovely, and I'm sure audience already start to see that deeply held, truthful, and serving values that you presented us with, and allowing the world to get a taste of. Um, so. These are the special series of my podcast where I talk with the masterful coaches like you, seasoned coaches like you. And first I get to start discussion with is about what is mastery and masterful coaching to you as a trainer, coach, assessor, supervisor, right? You play many roles. So, how do you recognize or demonstrate mastery?
Yeah. So I did a lot of thinking about this. So that's one of the first things. A masterful coach is reflective.
Hmm.
And um, In the beginning, I wasn't. I was a transactional coach. I was get it done, get it done, get them to tell me that it was great, and hopefully have a big impact. So when I think about it, first I'd say it's awareness. It's the quality and the capacity for awareness of the client's meta context, the influences that have been present in the client's life since they've been on the planet, whether those are familial influences, religious affiliation influences, political influences, geographic influences, racial, economic, whatever. What are those influences? So what's the meta view? Because that meta view has informed their feelings, their thinking, and their behaviors. And if people come to coaching either to do something new and different, to improve upon what they're doing, or to stop doing something, all those influences come to bear on those, one of those three objectives. So that's my first feeling, that first thought, the first component. What's the level of awareness that the person has of the larger context of their client and also their own self-awareness? What's influencing me at this moment? The second is the quality of their curiosity. Are they able to be curious, to detect patterns in what the client has said and not said? How their thinking, their behaviors, and also what is the impetus for them to behave in a certain way? What's the emotional self-management that person is capable of? What are they sharing about it? And to have in that curiosity a multidisciplinary understanding of what how to frame that, how to open that conversation. So for example, one thing that's I'm very attuned to is how much do people really register what this last 20 years has really influenced coaching, the neuroscience and the plasticity, neuroplasticity. So can people change? I believe they can. Coaches who say that people can't change are either dealing with the wrong population, or they haven't really had the patience and the awareness and the understanding of what's happening neurosympathetically, the parasympathetic nervous system. So that's one of the disciplines I think it's imperative that a master coach starts to understand something about, be curious about that, learn about it so you can recognize it and have an inquiry with the client about it. So myself, I'm trained as a sociologist, an organizational sociologist. So I'm looking always at change theory, systems theory, and chaos theory. So what's happening in change is, when a pivotal person makes a change in an organization, it throws the system into chaos, even though it might be a good change. So how do we handle that? So I think the third part of it I'm looking for, which I certainly didn't have at my earliest level, earliest stages of my development, which is humility, the willingness to say, I don't know, or I don't have the insight there or experience. So either teach me or let me introduce you to someone who I think could really be a better thought partner for you. So that humility to say, that's not the work I do. I'm not competent in that area. Because there's an expectation of leadership and executive coaches that's different from some of the other types of coaching that we do. Because people expect you to have some content. They expect you to have something underneath your baseball cap or whatever you're wearing, whatever cap you're wearing that day. And I guess the thing I mentioned before is, can they maintain a learner mindset opposed to a knower mindset? The knower mindset assumes that I'm the expert and I have some wisdom I should impart to you, and therefore you will be more successful, as opposed to you have prodigious resources yourself. You didn't get to this place without prodigious resources. How can we harness those? Have you fully utilized them? Are you operating from that full set of ownership and ownership of your talents? Or are you operating from some limiting assumptions that you somehow will not be able to have a big impact or as big an impact as you hope to have?
Mm-hmm.
So those are a few. I could probably go on, like there are 26 in the English alphabet, there are 26 letters, and I could probably go for 26 characteristics of masterful, but those are the ones that loom at the top for me.
Yeah, very insightful. Thank you. I'm thinking of what you're talking about, the coaches, which is part of the core competency anyway, whichever the governing organization you go, right? The coach's self-awareness and doing their own work to recognize the patterns within, patterns without, not to do the transference so that they can relate.
Exactly.
And another thing really I enjoyed hearing about the changeability. And I talk to my students about that trans-theoretical change model, right? Those stages don't occur at different points in time. In every moment in a session, clients' changeability shifts. It needs to be assessed almost with every interaction, right? The coach could say something, they could trigger in the nervous system, or they can find something else. So it's not like we need to assume that the client is coming to a session that they are already ready to change towards it. So it was lovely to hear that. And then the other wisdom you shared makes me think the conversation you and I had about coaches' evolution towards mastery. What would you like to say about that?
So it's interesting because I was just thinking I left out one of the criteria I really should have said, and it actually leads into a response to this question. So what I should have said, and it was at the bottom of my page, that mastery usually involves having failed and learned from it
Mm.
and emerging wiser and more humble. So that's one of the things I think is the maturation process is has a lot to do with failing, trying things, experimenting, beta testing, both with how we coach, our approach, but also how we show up as coaches, with what presence, with what capacity to hear who the other person is,
Mm.
and how they're viewing the situation they're bringing to you for coaching. And so there was a period of time, and then it was true for me, at least, I wanted to do it right. I wanted to do coaching right. And so when you're trying to do it right, you don't experiment as much. When you're trying to do it right, you have a tendency to sort of adhere to a kind of a formula, like, okay, this is the coaching process, and you should spend X amount of time debriefing the actions from the last time, X amount of time framing the goal for this session, X amount of time, no matter what model you're following. If you could be worried about following this transactional model. Can you follow a transactional model and have a transformation happen? I actually think you can.
Yeah.
I think you can, but it's this, what am I doing with that? So we often say to people in the beginning, just follow, and that's what I think of as a beginner coach. A beginner coach is following the coaching process and attempting to follow the client. So that's really what they're able to do at the time. And there are many people who come into coaching who have a lot of experience in other fields that are akin to coaching. maybe they were HR business partners to someone, they were involved in some human potential work at some point. Um, they've been, maybe they were teachers, maybe they were physicians, maybe they were nurses. They've been used to listening to people. So listening is part of what they did, but so they can follow the client's lead. And I remember an early instructor of mine in coaching said, if you can listen and you can maintain presence, you can coach. That was a great relief to me because I thought, as a sociologist, and I know how to ask questions and I know how to listen. No, I had hypotheses all the time. And I was trying to see if you would prove my hypothesis true. I wasn't truly listening to what you were bringing to the table. So funny. So, so that's the beginning, I think, is like, then you get to a point you're more comfortable with the coaching process and you can trust that the coaching process works. And then it's more intuitive. It's down here then. It's not up here all the time, like trying to enforce it. So you get more comfortable. It's sort of like midstream. And so when you get lost, you can lean on the coaching process, right? And that is an interesting place because you feel safer. You feel safer because in truth, you're stepping into the unknown space with a client every time you start a coaching session. You have no idea what will happen. And if you try to predict what will happen, even with an agenda that you set with them, if you try to predict it, usually what happens is something happens and then you try to stick to that original agenda and you don't know how to be flexible. So the coaching process, is here and it's kind of seesaws a little bit, but you can trust it. Before you trust yourself, you trust the process. That's what I believe. And then when you're a little bit like a novice, you start to do that. Um, and then I was so hungry to watch people coach. That was so important to me. And watching them coach and seeing how they asked questions that seemed to come from nowhere. Where did they come up with that question? I was busy writing down their question as if that would be like the secret sauce. And I would be able to produce that question. And it
Yeah.
would work just like it worked for them. Didn't work. Maybe 15% of the time. Then I had to learn how to trust myself in the process. And I think that was moving from the novice slope to the intermediate slope as if we were all skiers. And then it got to the place where you really have to recognize that you have to trust the client's wisdom. And that's a big leap of faith. So here I had spent all this time and money training myself to be a coach, mastering, these competencies or whatever. And now what I have to do is almost forget the whole thing. It's here because that's the only way I would know how to coach, but not to let the client feel the intuitive support they get from the coaching process, to be able to be with them and then thoroughly explore what they have on their mind or what they've seen using all their experience and being a master integrator on their behalf. And what I just described to you is kind of the experience that I went through. And it took all these years that I've been coaching, 30 years, to get there.
What a clear and lovely explanation of what we go through, really, transformation. And it made me think about the coaching process as the structures of a house. As a person, you maybe just bought the house, never had a relationship with the house or decoration. You just go measure and put everything. It doesn't look that great. And then you start to arrange the furniture, and finally, you know how to relate to the structures around you in a way that produces some level of freedom in partnership, and then you can use yourself as an artist within the structures. That's how I thought.
What a great metaphor. And one of the things you said, use yourself as an artist, reminds me. So, early coach training, steered away, sort of tried to keep coaches away from doing anything that would smack of therapy. And that has a history because there was the reason that the coaching competencies in ICF came into being,
Mm.
whereas there were, I believe, 7 states in the US that had proposals to put a ballot out to the voters to prevent coaching because they were calling it, the certain psychological bodies and associations
Mm.
were calling it, coaching was practicing therapy without a license.
Mm.
And ICF was successful in every case at that time in preventing those things from happening because we said we would be self-regulatory. We would have competencies, we would be peer reviewed, and we would hold to that. And to our great credit as a body, we've done so. And so, but there's sort of a price to be paid.
Mm.
Think about that. It's not as free form as some people would like. And so it's very interesting how different subspecialties have emerged to, serve people. But in fact, this idea of that there is a set of basic competencies, which is what ICF has identified and AC is identified in EMCC and other coaching bodies. And there are, some strong similarities, which is
Mhm.
really nice. And we can all benefit from even the diversity
Mm.
of this. So, yeah, I think I lost my way. What was the question again?
You were commenting on me saying, seeing yourself as an artist and partnering with the structures of the house. Yeah.
Glad you said it because the one thing that reminded me of, okay, so we stayed away from the psychological piece. So then coaching supervision started to grow.
Mm.
And in coaching supervision, we don't have that taboo. In coaching supervision, we actually use ourselves as an instrument. And we'll say things like, this is what I'm experiencing as I'm listening to you. My chest feels constricted,
Mm.
shoulders are up in my ears. I'm feeling short of breath, maybe one of those things. And I'm wondering where that's coming from.
Yeah.
And I would say in almost 85% of the cases where I have used that in supervision, the person said, I can't believe you just said that because I'm feeling this way as well. Or that happens with me, with my with my manager or with my team members or with my colleague that I'm having all this controversy with. I thought I have to use this in coaching too. I have to break that, sort of glass curtain, so to speak, and step into that space as an experiment. If the client rejects it, they reject it. It's up to them. And so, since I've been a supervisor, which is a long time, but as a credential supervisor, 6 years now, I'm regularly saying, I'm using the self as instrument, which is what I take from the artistry of it. And so I think there's a bridge here. So
Yeah.
the different disciplines, health and wellness coaching, supervision, mentoring, each of them can borrow and learn from each other. They're not, they're they're cousins, but there doesn't have to be this iron, there's something
Divine.
down in law. Yeah.
Yeah. Lovely to hear that, certainly. And one of the things that I talk about and teach is the holistic listening, holistic inquiry, right? Because human system is just not one thing. We have multi-layers, the nervous system, the respiratory system, right? All of it is responding and intelligent. And I feel also like you that coaches, every asset of coaches need to be included when levels of mastery is demonstrating, right? The partnership doesn't only occur through the intellect. That's what you're talking about, coaches' ability to receive through the intuition and the somatic systems and all that can be part of that partnership. Beautiful. So I wonder, you gave us a beautiful progression about what mastery is and coach's evolution is for you. You also talked about importance of the beginner's mind. So how would that be helpful in that evolution or mastery, or both?
So I think it would reduce the self-judgment, or the sort of the judgment that exists in the field, even if it's not expressed. That if you're a beginner, you don't know much. Which I actually think we should exalt the beginners because they're always stumbling over something. They're always stumbling over the truth. And so they are hungry
Yeah.
to learn and know. Now maybe they don't have the capacity to take it all in yet. Maybe that requires some fermentation, or like a wine, has to be aged, or a cheese. And that's true. So but the beginner's mind, if that's not kept alive, the coaching gets stale.
Mm.
So I don't really believe the maturation happens without a learner mindset. If I go in, I say, okay, I learned these competencies now, and I am going to inflict them on my client, because, but there's a very funny expression, and I can't remember, I think it might be Buckminster Fuller. I don't remember who is the philosopher who made this statement or this slogan popular. A fool with a tool is still a fool. So if we think of I don't actually think of the competencies as tools. I think of them differently. They're a tool with the wisdom around it to know how to use it. That's what I think a competency is, not just a skill. Because a skill, like a tool, like I have a stapler. But if I do it like this and I staple my finger, it's of no use to me whatsoever. That is not going to keep my finger together unless it's a medical stapler. So this idea of discernment has to emerge.
Mm.
And the beginner, if the beginner continues to recognize they're beginners and they don't know everything, then they're going to be automatically more humble. They don't have to recultivate that. So if we kept that alive, if we said, so I am a student of something that a field called leadership agility, which is about, it definitely cultivates a learner mindset, because if I'm just the expert in all settings, I don't give any opportunity for other person's ideas to surface. So if I'm an expert coach, that's a problem. I can have expertise, but if I raise coaching above the client and what they're after and their work, no, coaching is an enabling function for others. Yes, it's what we do, but it enables others. So that idea, if we hold that throughout our growth as a coach, I think we're going to be really true partners, as opposed to just waiting for the other person to have a problem that we can fix.
I'm also thinking, Meryl, that's obviously important to think about putting the client first and keep learning. There is also, in each session, we are learning who the client is, how are they responding to this situation, right? Each session is a learning session that I wonder that um, maybe the learner's mind term you use both for the beginner's mind and the learner's mind, maybe the learner's mind is a much more appropriate tool for, or the phrase for coaching into mastery, right? You learn the tools, you learn the skills, you learn artistry, you learn the client. What do you think about that?
I think it's true. And I mean, I think could be semantics, because
Yeah.
a beginner's mind for me comes, thinking of someone who is very influential, writer, a Suzuki, who is a master, a Zen master, and he wrote a beautiful book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which I read just about coincident with my beginning my coach training. And I kept them separate, of course. I didn't learn about the beginner's mind until I was past the beginner state.
Mm.
It's a very interesting thing. I didn't really register that it was applying to me. It needed to apply to me. So, but here's an interesting thing that I discovered. So, I think you know that I had a 10-year contract to teach in China.
Mhm.
And so I was in China quite often during that period of time. And I had very large classes, sometimes 75 students in a class.
Mhm.
And, there would be a period of time when we get to what does the competency actually look like in terms of behavior? And had the students, so we discussed the markers as part of as an expression of the competencies. And then I would demo something. So we define them, we discuss them, we would demo them, and then debrief them.
Mhm.
The audience, first of all, by studying them that way, small teams were they were assigned, so we took a competency and we assigned a team, a row, for example, in the classroom, to be the observers of that and to be actually give the examples back of where that was demonstrated. And I said to them, look, you just learned this in the last couple of days, and you're doing, I think, as almost as good a job as some of the assessors that I know at recognizing them. And so they were beginners. They
Mm.
saw it, they were hungry to understand it. And because of that, they didn't have any worries about, oh, am I doing it right? It was like a treasure hunt.
Mm.
And then there would be a hilarious thing because they would be recognizing somebody's marker, but not their own, and they were stealing. And then there was hilarious, but that was okay. It was all part of the discovery process now.
Mm.
So as an assessor for many years, since the beginning of assessing, and especially with the PCCs markers, I'm always hearing another framework when we debrief something, like when we go through a new training. And I'm hearing other people saying, well, this is clear, this isn't clear, this is insinuated but not expressed. And we don't do insinuation. We just have to do explicit, and that we're evidence collectors. So they were able to collect the evidence because they didn't have any preconceived notion that they would do it wrong.
Mm. Yeah, and that's actually, I think you're speaking more to the freedom, one's free movement out of getting out of their cognitive distortions, I would say. It has to be this. And yeah, that adds more into our freedom and mobility, right? Oh,
So
sorry.
well said.
And so, Meryl, when you think about your evolution as a teacher, coach, supervisor, assessor, many roles you're playing in this field, what contributed, if anything, other than what we discussed before, that you feel will be helpful for audience to know your mastery?
So all of us, most everyone who comes to coaching has delved into some other kind of field, some kind of practice, has some kind of real understanding of some discipline, something. So for my own example, when I was trained to be a dancer from the time I was 3 years old. My
Nice.
mother was a professional tap dancer. So I pretty much tapped as soon as I could walk, or could walk without toppling over. And then I didn't like tap dancing. And so I did other forms of dance. And it wasn't until many, many years later. And then I was a choreographer. I got injured when I was in my early 30s and I really couldn't dance anymore. And so I was doing choreography. And I remember telling this story in a coaching class when I was teaching at New York University. And there was someone in the back of the room who's like had his arms crossed across his chest. And he was a pretty deep thinker. So I knew something strange was going to come out of his mouth. And, or I suspected it because it often did and was very thought provoking. And it would stop me dead in my tracks. And he said, I can see the progression from dancing and choreography to coaching. Well, I never saw that. And he said, you are having to use the space, you have to use movement, you have to be able to sort of predict how to move to the next space. It was a very good comment. So the reason I'm answering your question this way is that be a master integrator of your life experience. Honor every part of it.
Mm-hmm.
It will be useful at some point. Don't use it. Don't brandish it as some sort of weapon of expertise to show other people, but this is where your trust yourself will come from. Whether you're a brand new coach, whether you're an intermediate coach, I was saying like on the novice slopes or going to the intermediate, trust that that is your collective wisdom of your honoring the whole process of your trajectory. And it will be useful to people over time. Not that you're going to present it, you're not going to give them your bio all the time, but that be grounded in those things that have informed your growth before you ever came to coaching, because the same will happen in coaching. This is going to be a yes and what you learned before, and then what you bring to the table as a coach. They can't be separate. You're one person. We don't close that area of our lives off. You never know. I recently had someone engage me because both of our husbands have the same deteriorating illness. I didn't expect going into this chemistry session that we would find this shared thing. So I understood where she came from. She understood that I understood. So that's also important. It just happened because she asked me a question and I shared it, and she shared. So embrace everything that came before so that you're ready to embrace everything that comes now. I guess that was what I would share.
That's beautiful. I help coaches to define their niches when they become coaches. And because of my own experience, like you were saying, when we leave our past behind, a big part of us is missing in the coaching space. When we integrate successfully, that there is the power that comes with it. Maybe that part is fatigued and tired, right? Before I was the coach, I came from engineering background in the process excellence, and that part got tired in the corporate environment. So maybe that wanted to take a back seat. But when I'm in the sessions, that structured part knows how to hold the session structure while my artist can come forward. It's just a different partnership and brings a different power. That's what I thought about in your beautiful share. And thank you for that. So what else that we may not have spoke about in your wisdom and wanting will be helpful to share with our audience about mastery, maybe when it comes to the learner's mind or coach's evolution or anything else that we haven't touched upon or did, but can add more.
So, although none of the big coaching bodies includes this, I think the master coach has to, in terms of defining the masterfulness of a coach, is what's the impact on the client. So I'm remembering a client, it's an ex-military guy who was busy sort of trying to run a department of very seasoned people, very expert people, but like he ran, a platoon when he was in the Army. And as a consequence, people were quitting left and right under him. And I had somebody in my coaching cadre who was an ex-military guy too. Of course, I made a terrible blunder and I put a Navy man with an Army man. And the only people in the United States could understand what a silly idea that was. But I just figured the same, or I was wrong. So I offered to come and speak, to work with this guy. And first I just did a session with him for free because it was a big client of ours and I wanted to make sure we were okay. And I said to him, so do you like your job? And the first thing he said to me, yes, except could be paid more if they didn't pay expensive consultants like you. So it didn't look like that was going to go anywhere. And he said, I don't have any problem with anything. And I said, is that true? Because I've just heard that of the 19 people who work for you, 7 have already tendered their resignation. So could you have a blind spot? And he hired me. At the very end, people had continued to exit because it was too little too late. And he told me that this was something, it's the first thing he'd ever failed at in his life. And I actually said, is there another way to look at that? And he said, maybe the failure is the door opener for a different way of functioning in the world. And like about a year later, I had to interview a young man who was going to receive coaching from someone, and I was trying to figure out which is the right coach to introduce him to in our pool. And he said, I said, so who's your role model? And he mentioned this fellow. Nobody would have said that before. So it was a big success, actually, because that man became a role model for younger people. And that's not because he didn't care about people. He'd made the change. He'd never fully integrated from having been in one world to another. And it's exactly what you and I are talking about, the power of the integration. So if we do that ourselves and integrate ourselves, we can help people. What are they yearning to do? Have all parts of them valued.
Yeah.
Who is not yearning for that?
Yeah. What a beautiful share. That's kind of, we did talk about earlier, not in this conversation, about inclusion, right? And we don't often talk about inner discrimination, inner exclusion, and we do discriminate a lot. And those parts live in the shadows, but there is a usefulness on that, and appreciating every part is a beautiful thing too.
What is allowable?
Yeah.
Can I allow?
Yeah.
can I allow all parts of me to surface?
Yes. And when we do that, I mean, it's still gonna be challenging thing for everybody, right? There are some parts of us that's gonna show up in a party with all these inappropriate colors and behaviors.
Yeah. I'm just looking for my baseball hat because sometimes I put that on and saying like I have to put on a different hat. So
Yeah, I was saying to a mentoring student, you don't have to show up to the cafe with a sombrero hat, but you can use some of your authentic colors to show up, right? But when we don't do it, how are we going to support another human being to do so, right? That's a significant thing to the mastery. Well, Meryl, this has been wonderful. Thank you for being here.
thank you
It's
for an exciting conversation to have.
Yes, I appreciate it. And I'm sure our audience will find a lot of value in your sharing. So, if they're interested, how can they find you and what services? We did mention, but what other services or events or anything you would like to share here?
So, you can find me through my name. My company's name is Meryl Moritz Resources. So if
Mhm,
you put that in a search engine, you'll find us, you'll find the different things that we do. But, what I do is I work primarily with large organizations, nonprofit, government, in this country, outside of this country, in this country being US, and happy to work outside the country as well. And I also am a mentor coach to executive coaches
mhm,
and a supervisor. I also take supervision into the world of executive coaching. So we have completed a round of executive coaching and they like that reflective space.
mhm,
I'll, instead of re-up for another round of coaching, I will do a supervision of the executives using the same concept of reflective space or restorative space and a normative space for them.
mhm,
So these are all different ways I stay relevant to, my own belief structure.
mhm. Beautiful structure. All right, Meryl, thank you so much.
Thank you for the invitation. I feel honored, and I hope there has been some value that will be ongoing value for you and the audience that you share this with.
Absolutely, they will. And so our audience, if you missed it in the beginning, you tuned into Coaching with Mastery and Elegance with Tijen Genco. If you like what you heard, consider subscribing to us and feel free to leave us a feedback. You can find us wherever your favorite podcast platform is. Until next time.